In this project, we're going to take video files, audio files, and previously created assets from Animate and sort of merge them all together and animate them over each other in order to create a promotional video for Electric Revenant Productions. When the video is finished, we're going to go ahead and actually export and render this to HD video that can be played back on any device that supports MP4 files. So to start out our 10-second promotional video, what we're going to need to do is pull in some actual video assets to make up our background imagery. But before we do that, note that I have here a project already created. This is an ActionScript 3.0 project, and the width is 1280 with the height at 720. The stage background I've made black, and the frames per second or frame rate is 24 FPS. So that means that every second is going to consist of 24 individual frames. Down here in the timeline, I've got my layer_1, which I'm going to keep my video in here. So I'm going to rename this to video so that we're set on that. And to pull in video into Animate, I need some video content. So I'm going to be actually creating that content inside of Adobe After Effects. Here we have our After Effects project, and we can see the video here, and it's pretty simple. I'm just using this for this like static electrified background that you can see when you scrub through it here. Now note that over here, it is about 10 seconds long, and we've got it set to 24 frames per second. And this matches what we set up our actual animate file as well. Also, if we look in composition and look at our composition settings, 1280 by 720 is also the exact width and height of our animate project. So what I did is I went to composition and chose to add to Adobe Media Encoder Q. This allows us to transcode this Adobe After Effects composition into an MP4 file suitable for Adobe Animate. Now, popping back over into Animate itself, to actually get our video into Animate, we're going to go to File, Import, and choose Import Video. We get the Import Video dialog where we can choose exactly how we're going to embed our video. So we can choose, for one thing, whether we want to point to a video file on our computer or point to a video that's been deployed to a web server or some sort of streaming service. If we do choose to use something on our computer, we can choose to load the video with playback component, to embed it in the SWF file and play in the timeline, or to embed H.264 video in the timeline, but this option is design time only. It's only meant as a guide. So we definitely don't want that. Either of these other two should be okay. However, you generally don't want to actually load large files within a SWF, and this should only work with FLV anyway. We're dealing with an MP4 file. So really what we want is to load external video with playback component. So basically the defaults. Here we need to browse to our files. And here is our project files with our video background MP4 that was created. So let's go ahead and open that and then hit next. The video playback component in Animate allows you to place a skin upon it. So these skins have a number of different controls. However, we're creating video content here. We don't actually need any controls for the user to mess with. So we're going to choose skin none. We're basically using this as a video display component. So go ahead and hit next. And there we go. It gives us an overview of what we're going to be doing. This is all fine. Let's go ahead and finish it up by hitting finish. All right. So what happens here is we've got our video component. with our video preview loaded in here. And if I click on the video component on the stage, we can see that this is an instance of the FLV playback component. We have a position and size, again, 1280 by 720, that's perfect. And let's go into our library here, because from here we can see the FLV playback component. Now this component can play back FLV files or MP4 files. So we are definitely want to use an MP4 file in this case, which is what we have right here. Let's go back to properties. Notice that I also have this little button here to show parameters. If we click on that, a little parameters panel comes up for our component, and we can see all the different things we can do to sort of tweak how this thing behaves. However, we want to keep everything at default here. So I'm going to leave that alone. All right, the last thing we need to do is actually test this to see if our video plays. So I'm going to run a test movie here. And there we go. Our video is playing back perfectly. Now notice that our video is playing back even though we only have a single frame in our timeline right now. The reason for that is because components are essentially movie clip symbols. And if you recall from before, movie clip symbols have their own independent internal timeline. So in this case, even though we only have the single frame here, the entire video will actually play back for us. Now that we have our video layer and an associated video file inside of our animate project, we're going to need to include audio as well. So let's go ahead and lock down our video layer and add a new layer right above that. We can rename that to audio. And from here, we're going to import our audio file. But before we do that, let's go ahead and open up the audio file we're going to be using in Adobe Audition to see what it looks like. Okay, here's our soundscape.wave opened inside of Audition. And if we go ahead and kind of scrub around, play it back and so forth, we can definitely see that we got some audio going on here. We've got our waveform up here. We can see how loud it is down at the bottom. And also, if we look at the properties of our wave file, we can see that this is 8 seconds in length. We see the sample rate, the channels, the bit depth, and so on. So to pull this file into our animate project, we're going to go File, Import, and in this case, I'm going to import to Library. You could also import to Stage, but we'll place it on the stage later. If I import to Library, it'll bring it into our library for later use. So here's our soundscape.wave file. I'm going to hit Open. And then if we look at our library right here, there it is, soundscape.wave. We do have a quick preview control here that we can use. But if we right-click on our soundscape.wave and go to Properties, we get a whole bunch of information about this particular file. So we can see the same properties reflected here as we saw inside of Audition. What you'll also notice is the ability to change the compression. So if we wanted to really crunch this down to something like an MP3 file, we can convert it to mono, we can crush the bitrate down to 64 or worse, and we can change the quality. So here we can see this will output a 64 kilobit per second mono file. It's 4.5% of the original file. In this case, we're only using this animate project to actually create a composite video promotional material. So we can keep this at its current compression settings. So in that case, I'm going to hit cancel to get out of here without making any changes. And I want to show one more thing around library items since we're in here looking at these. If you right click, you may notice that a lot of these have an update option. So if you choose update, what you can do is actually change the WAV file outside the library. And then if you hit update from here, it'll refresh that data. without you having to import it again. So it's pretty handy. We're going to close this without doing anything either. All right, to actually add our audio to the timeline from the library, what I'm going to want to do is take this whole thing out to about 10 seconds. Really 10 seconds exactly. And this little guide up top here is pretty useful. You can see that 10 seconds at 24 frames per second is 240 frames. So just click drag across those two layers right there. And then we can hold our mouse button down and choose to extend our frames out to here, just like that. Now, if you recall, our audio file was actually 8 seconds in length. So it might make sense to start it at about 1 second, because that's going to give us a bit of a buffer before it starts, and then it's going to end with a second left of the video. So we'll have a little 1 second buffer on either side. I'm going to insert a keyframe here. You could also choose blank keyframe. It's going to do the exact same thing. And then if we go over to our properties panel with that particular frame selected, in our frame properties, notice that we have a sound option here. Let's collapse some of these other ones so we don't need to look at them. Here we can choose a sound from our library. Right now it's none, but hey, there's soundscape.wave. Let's choose that. You can choose from different effects here. So only using the left or right channels, you can do some fades and things like that. Or you could even do some custom things through this edit sound envelope module. So from here, you can add different points. So to create fades and things like that. So if I wanted to fade out right there, I could do that. You can add as many of these little points as you want to create different effects with your audio. I'm just going to hit cancel here because it's exactly like I want it right now. Notice as well that this is set to event sync. Now, this isn't something we want necessarily for the type of project we're doing. Anything that the audio needs to be frame by frame accurate with whatever motion is going on, you're going to want to choose stream for an option. Stream is going to bind each frame of audio with each frame of anything else in your movie. If you choose any of the other settings, like event or start, it'll basically just start the audio and play it regardless of what's happening actually visually on the stage. Stream is going to bind those things together and make sure it's perfect. If you're doing character animation, Stream is really good for that as well, because you really need to sync up voices and lips and things like that. Note though, before we move on, that Stream sync type is only available in ActionScript 3 file types. You can't actually use Stream in any other types of project inside of Animate. You can see with that added, we get the waveform on the stage starting at that keyframe and going all the way until the sound stops, sure enough at 9 seconds, since we put in that 1 second there. Another good thing about having your file set to stream is that as you scrub, you can actually hear what's going on in the background softly as you see the visuals change on your stage. Now, since this video is a movie clip symbol, we actually can't see any of what's going on within it unless we publish or perform a test movie. We have one more thing to import into this project, and that is a logo to work against the background. So what we need to do is go ahead and create a new layer above our audio layer, and I'm going to lock that audio layer down. This new layer, I'm going to double click and rename it logo. And I want the logo to appear somewhere around frame 80. So I'm going to select frame 80 and insert a keyframe because that's where we want it to kind of start. What I'm going to do next is to create a new symbol. So what we can do is go to Library, and notice way down at the bottom, there's a new symbol option. So if I click New Symbol, the New Symbol dialog appears, and we can give it a name. I'm going to name this Logo, And then we can choose a type. So we can choose from movie clip, button, or graphic. Now we're going to choose graphic for this because we want the timeline of our logo to be bound specific to our main timeline. If we chose something like movie clip is going to sort of loop independent of our main timeline. It'll just keep going. But movie clips are good because you can put a lot of different effects on them, and you can also give them instance names so that you're able to do things with them through code. So if you want to do stuff either just advanced effects wise or do stuff with code, definitely movie clips. Buttons are very special because they have 4 distinct frames in their own timeline meant to represent button states. So we have an up button, we have hover, we have like a down state, and then we have a hit state that we can be defined. But as mentioned, we're going to choose graphic because graphics are bound specifically to the main timeline. And when we have a graphic on our main timeline, by scrubbing the main timeline, we can actually preview the internal graphic timeline in line with everything else. Whereas a movie clip, you actually can't preview any of that stuff in there. It'll look like it's not even moving unless you publish. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And notice that we're now within our logo graphic symbol here. So this graphic symbol timeline has a single layer. And what we're going to do is actually import our logo.swift file that was created way back in project 1. So let's go ahead and choose File, Import, and we want to this time import to stage. That's going to place the content directly on the stage within this graphic symbol. So here I can locate logo.swift and choose Open. All right. So you can't really see very well because our background's black. Let's switch that up a bit. We'll go to Properties. In our document properties, let's change this to a different color. So maybe this gray color here. And then we can preview. And notice it's basically a frame by frame animation that's happening here. So we've got our animation, and this is all contained within layer 1. All right, let's change our stage color back to black. And up here, we can revisit the main timeline. So here in the main timeline, if you recall, we created a keyframe at frame 80. That's where we want to be right now. And going to the library, we're going to find our logo graphic symbol that was created, and we're going to pull that directly onto the stage. All right. With that on the stage, we now are going to center it. So let's go to Properties. And we could, of course, always change the X and Y position here. But what we're going to do is actually go into the Align panel and choose Align to Stage. And just click Align to Stage, center both vertical and horizontal here. And you can see inside of the Properties panel that those locations have definitely changed. So as mentioned before, if we go in here and scrub now, we can see it kind of coming in and out, and it just animates, it loops over and over again. So why would it loop over and over again like that? If we go and inside of our object properties, so selecting our actual symbol instance here, we can see that this is an instance of the logo graphic. There's our position and size, color effects, and with graphic symbol instances, we're able to define things about looping, which is what we want. You can see right here, it's set to play graphic in loop. That's not what we want. We want to actually play the graphic once. So we're going to click this button right here. It's like a little play button with a 1 next to it. You can also specify what the first frame is. In this case, it's fine to just leave it like it is. Note that you can also just hold on a single frame for any of your graphics. So if I chose something like this, we could even open up the frame picker. And from here, we see all the different frames that constitute our graphic. and we could pick one of those to actually hold on. However, that isn't really what we want to do, so I'm going to get out of there and close the frame picker. As mentioned, we definitely just want to play the graphic once, and that's it, then hold after that. So if we go through and scrub, we can see it plays, and it doesn't loop anymore. It just holds there, which is exactly what we want. Okay, what we're going to do now is apply motion to our logo through use of a motion tween. So the way to do this is anywhere on this tween span here, starting with the keyframe at frame 80 on the logo layer, we can go ahead and have a look right here above the timeline, and we have the option to create a type of tween. We can create motion tweens in this case, or classic tweens. The reason that shape tween is not highlighted is because animate knows that we have a symbol instance on this layer, and with a symbol instance, we can only choose between classic tweens or motion tweens, because shape tweens are only used with shapes and drawing objects. So let's go ahead and choose create motion tween. And there we go. It's now highlighted in this kind of yellow-orange color. And over here, the layer actually gets a motion tween icon, specifying that it's a motion layer now. Let's go and figure out where we want this to kind of go in. I'm going to say somewhere around 150. We're going to want this to fill up the entire stage. So I'm going to pull back here to like 25. That's a lot. Maybe not 25%. Let's go to 50%. That's better. And I want to go ahead and use my free transform tool. If I hold down shift and pull from the corner, I get my text right there, along with the logo being really big. We could also go down here to the beginning. And if we want to, we can make this like super small as well. There we go. So now if we play this back, we can see sort of how it comes in pretty nicely there. What I'm also going to do is go through and change my alpha transparency. So I want it to actually start with a 0% alpha transparency. So selecting my object on the stage, in my object properties, if we look down to color effects, we can see that we can choose something like alpha. I can take that all the way down to 0. And then at some point, let's say, I don't know, 90 or 95. Let's go to 95. And I'll select that object on the stage once again. Notice it's bigger now because we are scaling that up at this point. We can pull that all the way back up to 100%. So we do get a little bit of weirdness here happen. And the reason that we get that is because we have that alpha transparency applied that actually applies to everything inside of our symbol. So there's a couple things we could do to alleviate this. What I'm going to do is just go all the way to 80 here, select the object once again, and notice in our looping, if you recall, we actually played the graphic once, but we started on the first frame. So I can actually go inside by double clicking here, and let's figure out exactly the point, and we may have to zoom in quite a bit to see this. But what we need to do is find out the point where we actually want to start this. And there it is. We want to start this off at frame 19. So there's two things we could do. We could always remove these frames right here, but it's actually even easier if we go in here and we can use the frame picker perhaps, or even just type in frame 19 here. Let's go to the frame picker. It's hard to see because most of these are black anyway, but we're going to find frame 19. Oh, there it is, frame 19. Okay. So there it fills in frame 19 for us. And it's actually put it in the wrong spot because we had our playhead over here. So if this happens, there's a number of things you can do, of course. You can do a Command or Control Z, or you can select that keyframe, right click, and choose to clear keyframe all, and that's going to get rid of it. So what we need to do is make sure we're on that first frame. And there we go, first frame at 19. And again, alpha at 0 here. And then alpha at 100% right there. And you know what? We might actually want to just select and drag that in a little bit more. And then if we go back out to fit in window, let's actually see how this looks. That's pretty good. Let's see it kind of in line with everything else. So I'm going to go to my test movie button up here, and we can actually test the whole thing. And there it comes. Ah, that looks really good. Very nice. Now that we've got this motion happening here between these two frames, it's pretty good, but there is some easing we can do. It's very linear right now, and as we've seen before, we can always expand a motion tween by double clicking upon it, and we can access the motion editor. So because I have the scale transform on here, both X and Y, I can highlight either of those options here. And we also have an alpha transparency effect that is really only from here to here, and that's highlighted in green. And that effect is just fine. I don't really want to mess with that too much. But in terms of scale, if we're looking at X or Y, they're both kind of in with each other right now, right? So let's actually choose one of these. Maybe I'll just choose X because it's up top. And there's a couple things to note down here that we haven't seen before. So there is this little option to add anchor points to our graph. This is going to allow us to create a custom ease. So I can click to add an anchor point and pull that up like this. This is going to really ramp up when we start out and then sort of ease off to its ending position when it comes to transforms. Now, note up here that this is distorted now because I applied that only to the X scale and not to the Y scale. So let's click on the Y scale as well. And I'm going to select our anchor point tool again. And there we go. It's approximately the same point. We've got the same handles here. And if we preview, we can see how that comes in really fast and then eases off. So we've created our own custom ease in here just based on a couple little anchor points. We can do the same thing, of course, with our alpha property effects. So if I choose add anchor point on graph and then we pull that, I can even do something that's quite the opposite. I can pull it this way. And now you can see that's quite different. And you can, of course, tweak these things as much as you want, really, until they're sort of working for you. I don't actually want this anchor point here. So what you can do is select it, and you can do things like copy, reverse, flip. But if you wanted to actually delete it with that selected, you can just hit delete, and then you've got your basic linear amount going on here. Now, you can always go through and add different easing presets to this stuff as well. We've got the same kind of presets that we had when we looked at the motion editor before. But if you go through and create your own custom eases like this, they can actually be pretty complicated because you can place as many anchor points as you want and tweak these different handles and so forth. just as you would with any sort of path that you might be working with in vector inside of animate. So I'd say play around with this a bit, and then when you're finished, just double click to close that editor once again. And then guess what? You've got your nice custom ease that plays back exactly like you want it to inside of your project. All right, we're almost done. There is one thing that does kind of bother me a bit about our logo, and that is the text right here. It just blends in a little too much with the background. Granted, when some of these electrical waves sort of pass behind it, you can read the text a lot better, but a lot of times it just really blends in with the background. So one of the things about graphic symbols, of course, if I select this graphic symbol instance here, we can see that we have some basic color effects that we can do on it, but not much else. We don't get the ability to add things like blend modes or filters, which we would if instead of a graphic symbol, we had made this a movie clip symbol. So how do we get around that? Well, recent versions of Adobe Animate, if we look in our document properties, and then in document settings, clicking on more settings is going to give us the document settings dialog here. And note that we're using advanced layers. This has been enabled because it has a check mark. Any new project that you create inside of Animate now is going to by default be using advanced layers. So that actually gives us a lot of opportunities to add some new advanced stuff to our compositions. So let's go ahead and either OK or cancel. Either one works. We didn't actually change anything. But what we want to do is actually double click on our graphic symbol. And now we're inside of our logo symbol instance, right? So if we click on layer 1, we get what's known as layer effects. And this is all because we're using advanced layers mode. So layer effects are applied to every single element in the layer that you're currently on. So notice here that we have color effects like we did before, but we also have different blend modes that you can choose from. And additionally, we have the ability to add filters. So one of the best ways to have our text stand out is to add a neat glow filter around everything. So let's click on the plus button here to add filter. And we're going to choose glow. And we can already see the glow filter applied. But let's go ahead and add this color based on the electricity. So I want it to be sort of, this white blue electrical color. Something like that. And we'll just pull that up a bit so that it's a bit more prevalent. We can increase the strength as well. And I'm going to change the quality of this to either medium or high because low just ain't really doing it for me. Maybe medium. All right, so my blur Y, this was not locked, so I'm gonna have to type in that as well. And let's lock it down here and maybe pull it back down from 20. I'm thinking 13 is gonna work out pretty good. The strength is 195, and that's great. So if we scrub now, we can see this actually does apply to every one of these frames here because they're all part of this same layer. Note also that the keyframes, which were filled in black before, because they now have layer effects upon them, they show up as white dots instead of black. So it's a good indicator. Let's go ahead and go back out to scene 1 so we can have a look at this. And it's pretty good, but I think it's a bit severe. So I'm going to go back inside, choose my layer again, and let's make some adjustments here. Let's pull that down. Pull this down a bit. It's just not subtle enough for me. And oh, you know what might work out even better too is if we sample the color from his eyes. That might be pretty good. All right, so that should be more subtle. Let's go back to scene 1. And yeah, it's definitely more subtle. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, pretty good. All right, if we go ahead and test this now, that should be good for our final version. All right, there it is. Nice and smooth too. All right, with our video finished, let's go ahead and actually render this entire composite animation to an integrated audio visual video file. So to do that, we're going to go to File, Export, and choose Export Video / Media. All right, so here we can resize this if we want to. I'm going to keep it at 1280 by 720. You can choose to ignore the stage color if you want, and that will generate an alpha channel. So this is really useful if you're bringing in your animation into some other application like Premiere, After Effects, or something like that. Now here you can choose the span. So the first option here is which scenes you want to actually output. So I only have a single scene, scene 1, so that's all I can choose. And you can choose from all frames if you want, or a specific frame range. So you can choose any of the frame ranges that you might to process a segment of this video. I just want everything. So I'm going to choose all frames. And then the next bit here actually taps into Adobe Media Encoder and exposes the different format and preset settings that exist within there. So we definitely want H.264, but as you can see, you've got a bunch of different settings to choose from. And in terms of presets, we have a default, but there's also stuff like match source, medium bitrate. I would kind of suggest that you go down, and depending upon what you're trying to do, of course, if you're shooting it to YouTube, 720p HD is going to do pretty well for you. That's what I'm going to choose here because, we are using a 720p HD setting here in terms of our width and height. We can choose our output, format, and location. And if we want to, we can start Adobe Media Encoder, the render queue immediately. So if these settings are good, we can tell it, yeah, go ahead and start that as soon as it fires up. If we want to have additional derivative settings inside of Media Encoder, then we could untick that and then do additional processes in there. So I'm going to just keep that checked because all I want is the YouTube video. So let's hit export. And it's going to go ahead and render everything for us frame by frame. All right, so it's brought in a temporary MOV here. It is rendering it down here, and now it's finished. At this point, we have the ability to go ahead and create duplicate versions of this and provide different presets. But if you don't want to do that, you can always just exit out of Media Encoder, and you can see inside of Animate, it tells us the file has been successfully created. Perfect. We now have an MP4 file specifically encoded to run well on the YouTube platform. And of course, you could change any of those settings you want to target additional platforms and even additional file types. It's a super powerful feature inside of Animate.